Hey guys, tonight we're diving into the origins of philosophy, where the seeds of Western thought were first planted in ancient Greece. Picture yourself stepping into the dusty streets of Athens, a place where thinkers like Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle roamed, pondering life's most profound questions. The air is thick with the scent of olive trees, and the chatter of philosophers echoes from the agora as people debate life, the universe, and everything in between. You're here to join the conversation, and trust me, you'll probably leave questioning everything you thought you knew. Don't worry though, it's all part of the process. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Feel free to drop your location and local time in the comments too. I'd love to know where you're tuning in from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. We begin where it all started. Ancient Greece, a place of marble columns, sun-soaked landscapes, and minds that shaped the course of human history. Imagine yourself walking through Athens around 400 BCE, a time when people weren't just trying to get through the day. They were trying to understand why we were here, where we were going, and how to live the good life. You see, the roots of Western philosophy stretch all the way back to this period, and the questions raised back then still echo in our lives today. At the heart of this intellectual revolution was Socrates, not much of a looker by ancient Greek standards, but his influence is immeasurable. Socrates didn't write down his ideas. He didn't need to. Instead, he spent his days wandering around Athens, asking questions, deep, probing questions. The kind of questions that make you uncomfortable, that dig at the very core of what you believe. And the beauty of it all? He didn't give answers. He just asked the questions. His famous method, the Socratic method, encouraged people to think critically and question their assumptions. He believed that true wisdom came from knowing that you knew nothing. Can you imagine that? Finding peace in the fact that you know nothing, but you're still seeking. Socrates didn't mind making people uncomfortable. He wasn't interested in fame or fortune. His goal was simply to make people think. In fact, that's how he ended up on trial, charged with corrupting the youth of Athens and introducing new gods. But, being the philosopher he was, Socrates didn't go down without a fight. He faced his death with grace, choosing to drink the hemlock rather than live in exile. In a way, his death was a testament to his beliefs, his commitment to truth, no matter the cost. Historians still argue whether Socrates' final act of defiance was an example of true wisdom or pure stubbornness. Was he a martyr, or just a man too proud to compromise? Regardless of the debate, his legacy has endured for millennia. The idea that questioning is the pathway to understanding, that's at the core of everything that follows. And from this seed of thought, the ancient Greek philosophers began to bloom. They were a diverse bunch, all looking at life through different lenses. Yet, all of them shared the same central goal: to figure out the best way to live. The questions they asked weren't just about understanding the world. They were about understanding themselves, their fellow humans, and their place in the grand scheme of things. One of the most influential of these thinkers was Plato, Socrates' student, who took his teacher's ideas and expanded them in bold new directions. Plato founded the Academy in Athens, one of the first institutions of higher learning in the Western world. Here, he taught his own version of philosophy, one that was heavily focused on the existence of abstract ideals. You might be thinking, that sounds nice, but what does it have to do with me? Well, let me explain. Plato's theory of the forms suggests that the physical world around us is just a pale shadow of a higher, more perfect reality. He argued that what we see, hear, and touch is all transient, flickering, if you will, while the true essence of things exists in a realm beyond human perception. Imagine a perfect circle, one that has never been drawn in the physical world. Plato believed that this ideal circle exists somewhere beyond our sight, and the circles we draw here on earth are merely imperfect representations of that ideal. The idea of the forms wasn't just about circles, though. It was about everything. Beauty, justice, love. These were all forms, perfect and unchanging, waiting to be understood. Historians still argue whether Plato's idea of an ideal realm is metaphysical poetry or a deep truth about reality. Some philosophers have followed him down this path, while others have dismissed it as mere fantasy. But whether you agree with him or not, his ideas have had a profound influence on everything from mathematics to art to politics. In fact, Plato's theory of the forms still pops up in modern debates about idealism versus materialism. If you've made it this far without nodding off, you'll probably agree that ancient Greek philosophy isn't exactly light reading. It's the kind of philosophy that gets under your skin, gets you questioning what you thought you knew, and leaves you wondering if you'll ever find the answers. And that's okay. Because at its heart, philosophy is not about having all the answers. It's about asking the right questions. And no one did that better than Socrates. Now, let's take a quick breather. You're probably wondering, is there more to ancient philosophy than just deep thinking and wondering about the nature of the universe? The answer is yes. Ancient Greek philosophy wasn't just about abstract concepts. It was also about practical living. Take Aristotle, for example. He was Socrates' student. But unlike Plato, he didn't believe in a world of ideal forms. Instead, he was all about the physical world and the practical application of philosophy to daily life. Aristotle believed that the goal of life was happiness or eudaimonia, a state of flourishing that could only be achieved through virtue and reason. For Aristotle, happiness wasn't some abstract concept. It was something you had to work at every day. It wasn't about finding some perfect, unattainable ideal. It was about living in accordance with reason and balancing the extremes of excess and deficiency. Aristotle's golden mean suggested that virtue lies in the middle, between two extremes. Think of it as the Goldilocks principle of ethics, everything in moderation, nothing too extreme. Aristotle's teachings are still relevant today, and his ideas on virtue and ethics form the foundation of much of Western moral philosophy. But despite his focus on reason and moderation, historians still debate whether his approach to happiness is too simplistic. Can you really just work your way toward happiness? Or is there more to life than balance? These questions may have started in ancient Greece, but they didn't end there. They continue to ripple through history, appearing in the works of philosophers from all over the world. But tonight, we're focusing on how those first thinkers, those ancient Greeks, helped set the stage for everything that came after. It all started here, in this sun-soaked land of olive trees and marble pillars. And whether or not you believe in the forms, the golden mean, or the search for virtue, one thing is certain: philosophy began here, with questions that continue to shape the world we live in today. Remember that curious question Socrates asked: what is the good life? Well, Plato, Socrates' star pupil, was fascinated by this question too. But while Socrates liked to stir things up with questions and thought experiments, Plato took a different approach. His answer to the question of what is the good life wasn't just philosophical meandering. It was a vision, a bold vision, one that set the stage for centuries of philosophical thought. Let's enter Plato's world, which isn't quite the Athens we know, but a world where ideas reign supreme, more than the everyday squabbles of politics, war, and city life. For Plato, the key to a meaningful life wasn't just in living well or accumulating wealth. No, he saw deeper significance in the pursuit of something higher, something eternal, the search for truth, justice, and the soul's ultimate purpose. This pursuit would guide you toward living your most virtuous life. But how do you even begin to understand what's truly real? Plato believed the world around us, the one we see, touch, and experience, is a mere shadow of something much more profound. This was his famous theory of the forms or ideas. The world we live in, full of fleeting moments, imperfect objects, and change, was like the flickering of a candle compared to the eternal light of the forms. Think about the perfect, flawless concept of a chair that exists somewhere in a higher reality, a chair that doesn't wobble, doesn't break, and can never be splattered with coffee. The chairs you sit on every day, they are merely approximations, imperfect copies of that ideal form. In Plato's view, everything in our world, whether beauty, love, or justice, has a perfect, unchanging essence in this higher realm. It's like the difference between seeing a blurry, distorted image of your favorite painting in the dark and witnessing it in its full, vibrant, untouched glory when the sun is shining down on it. That's the difference Plato saw between our world and the world of the forms. Plato's philosophy laid out the foundation for a world beyond materialism, suggesting that the key to understanding life is to look beyond mere physical existence. But here's the thing: historians still argue whether Plato's forms were a profound metaphysical reality or just an elaborate philosophical construct. After all, how could anyone truly access these perfect forms? Did Plato's ideal realm actually exist, or was it just a grand metaphor? If so, what does it mean for us to engage with it? These are the questions that philosophers have asked for centuries. For Plato, it wasn't enough to just live a good life. You had to understand the true nature of things, what exists in the perfect realm of forms. As we move deeper into his work, one of Plato's other big ideas surfaces: the allegory of the cave. Now, imagine being chained in a dark cave your whole life, staring at a wall. The only things you see are shadows, and you believe those shadows are all there is to reality. This is how Plato described the unenlightened human condition: seeing only shadows of the truth, not the truth itself. The moment you escape the cave and step into the blinding sunlight, however, you are faced with a new, overwhelming reality. But, in Plato's view, only the philosophers, those seeking truth, are capable of breaking free of their chains and seeing the world for what it truly is. But, you may wonder, How does this apply to your own life? Imagine the everyday world around you, the busyness, the routine, and then ask yourself, what shadows am I seeing? What truths am I missing by simply accepting things as they are? Plato challenges you to dig deeper, to search for a truth that transcends what is seen. And of course, it's not easy. Escaping the cave requires intellect, discipline, and a willingness to change your view of reality. Historians still debate whether Plato's allegory is an exaggerated view of enlightenment or an insightful commentary on the human condition. Can we ever truly escape the cave? Or are we doomed to live in a world of partial understanding, always grasping at shadows? For Plato, the only way out was philosophy itself, the quest for knowledge and truth. But what would it look like for us today, in the midst of our own distractions and illusions, to seek the same kind of clarity? Meanwhile, let's turn our attention to a completely different philosopher, Aristotle. If Plato was the dreamer, then Aristotle was the practical one. Aristotle was all about the physical world and the tangible. His philosophical pursuits weren't about creating abstract ideals. Instead, he focused on what could be observed, studied, and tested. Where Plato saw a higher world of abstract forms, Aristotle saw a world of change and movement that could be understood by rational thought and careful observation. Aristotle was a student of Plato, but their philosophies diverged significantly. While Plato sought the perfection of a world beyond the senses, Aristotle sought perfection here, in the tangible world we experience every day. For Aristotle, philosophy was about logic, reason, and understanding how everything, from the stars to the smallest particles, fitted into a grand, logical system. He was the father of formal logic, developing tools that we still use today, like the syllogism, a deductive form of reasoning. His work on logic alone would lay the foundation for the scientific method centuries later. Aristotle's view of the good life was grounded in his idea of eudaimonia, or flourishing. To Aristotle, a good life wasn't about seeking pleasure for its own sake, nor was it about sacrificing oneself for some higher ideal. Instead, it was about finding balance, living according to reason, and cultivating virtue. Aristotle's golden mean, a concept that emphasized the balance between extremes, became central to his philosophy. So, whether it was courage, generosity, or wisdom, Aristotle believed that the key to living a virtuous life was moderation. Not too much, not too little, just right. Historians still debate whether Aristotle's balance between reason and virtue is achievable in modern life. Can we really achieve balance in today's chaotic world? Is it even possible to live a life of flourishing when the demands of modern society pull us in every direction? Aristotle's ideas on balance may seem simple, but they carry profound implications for how we approach our daily lives. How can you cultivate virtue and live in accordance with reason when the world constantly distracts you? The philosophical journey doesn't stop here. There are many more questions waiting to be explored. What about the Stoics? What about Epicurus? What about the philosophers who followed Aristotle? These questions won't answer themselves, and you might find that the more you ask, the more you uncover. But as we leave the world of ancient Greece and turn toward the next great thinkers, one thing is clear: the search for truth, for a good life, and for meaning is a never-ending journey. Just ask Plato, Socrates, or Aristotle. They'll tell you the path is never simple, but it's worth every step. All right, now that we've taken a deep dive into the minds of Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle, let's pause for a moment and shift our focus. You see, while these ancient Greek philosophers were busy dissecting the world through reason, there was a whole new wave of thought emerging, one that was less concerned with lofty ideals and more focused on the human experience, particularly the art of living well in a chaotic world. Enter the Stoics. Imagine yourself walking through the bustling streets of Rome around 300 BCE. You're surrounded by the ever-present clamor of politics, trade, and war. It's not a place for the faint of heart. The empire is vast, power struggles are constant, and the personal turmoil of ordinary Romans is just as intense as the fate of the empire itself. But amidst all this, the Stoics, the philosophical giants of their time, are offering a simple solution: serenity through control. The Stoics, led by thinkers like Zeno of Citium and later the famous Roman emperor Marcus Aurelius, had a radically different approach to life. They believed that the key to happiness wasn't in external circumstances, but in our response to those circumstances. If you can control your emotions, thoughts, and actions, then you can find peace no matter what the world throws at you. In the Stoic view, the only thing truly within your control is your own mind. Everything else, your job, your relationships, your health, are all subject to forces beyond your control. This might sound a bit harsh, but bear with me. The Stoics weren't about denying emotions or pretending everything is fine when it's clearly not. They were about recognizing what you can and cannot control, and focusing only on the things you can change. And you know what? They didn't just theorize about this, they lived it. For instance, Marcus Aurelius, one of the most famous Stoics, wasn't just a philosopher sitting on a mountaintop. He was the Roman emperor, responsible for leading an empire, engaging in endless wars, and making difficult decisions every day. Yet, he practiced Stoicism and wrote his personal reflections in a journal, which we now know as meditations. This journal is filled with reminders to control his thoughts, accept life's challenges, and remain focused on what truly matters. Historians still argue whether Stoicism is an idealized philosophy or a realistic one for the modern world. Is it really possible to remain calm and detached in the face of the chaos and pain of everyday life? Or is it just a convenient escape from the harsh realities of human emotion? Some say that Stoicism's emphasis on emotional control is exactly what many of us need in a world that often feels out of control. Others feel that by ignoring emotions or accepting everything passively, Stoics miss out on the richness of the human experience. But one thing is certain: Stoicism has left a profound mark on Western thought. And in today's fast-paced, high-stress world, its teachings are more relevant than ever. Whether you're navigating a tough work situation, trying to handle personal setbacks, or just dealing with the daily grind, the Stoic mindset is one of enduring calm in the face of adversity. It's not about avoiding pain. It's about learning to coexist with it and finding peace despite it. But let's not get too comfortable in the Stoic world just yet. While Stoicism was advocating for control and calm, another school of thought was popping up, one that focused on the pursuit of pleasure. Enter Epicurus, a man who would challenge everything the Stoics stood for by turning their philosophy upside down. Epicurus a philosopher from ancient Greece who lived around the same time as the Stoics, offered a completely different perspective. While the Stoics taught that happiness came from controlling your emotions and accepting fate, Epicurus argued that the key to happiness was pleasure, but not the kind of pleasure you might think. He wasn't talking about indulgence, excess, or living a life of hedonistic abandon. No, for Epicurus, the most important pleasures were the simple, natural ones: friendship, contemplation, and the avoidance of pain. Epicurus believed that humans are naturally inclined to seek pleasure and avoid pain. But unlike today's modern society, where pleasure is often equated with material gain or instant gratification, Epicurus taught that true happiness comes from living modestly and seeking long-term tranquility. For him, the greatest pleasure was found in a calm, serene life, free from fear and pain, which could only be achieved through wisdom and self-control. Now, if you're picturing Epicurus as the ancient Greek version of a party animal, think again. His philosophy was all about moderation, not indulgence. He believed that by focusing on simple pleasures and cultivating meaningful relationships, we could avoid the suffering that comes from desire, fear, and unnecessary attachment to material things. In fact, he believed that even the pursuit of wealth and fame could lead to more anxiety than pleasure. Historians still argue whether Epicurus's vision of pleasure is an idealistic fantasy or a more grounded, realistic approach to human happiness. Is the pursuit of pleasure truly the key to a fulfilling life? Or is it just an oversimplified escape from life's inevitable struggles? Some argue that Epicurus's view of pleasure is just what we need in our overly stressed world, where people are constantly chasing external rewards and missing out on the simple joys of life. But others feel that Epicurus oversimplified the complexities of human desire and that his philosophy is too focused on avoiding pain rather than addressing the deeper, more existential aspects of human experience. Regardless of where you land in this debate, one thing is clear: Epicurus was a master of questioning society's conventional notions of happiness. He taught that true pleasure doesn't come from acquiring more, but from appreciating what you already have. And while the Stoics were focused on mastering their emotions and the Epicureans on enjoying life's simple pleasures, there was yet another group of philosophers who took an even more radical approach to life. These were the Cynics, led by figures like Diogenes, who rejected the very idea of societal norms and values altogether. Diogenes, in particular, was known for his extreme behavior. He lived in a barrel, or tub, depending on who you ask, in the middle of Athens, and he didn't care one bit about wealth, fame, or social status. His idea of happiness: freedom from society's constraints. Diogenes believed that the only true happiness was living a life of total simplicity and self-sufficiency. He had no interest in material possessions and rejected anything that could tie him down. Historians still debate whether Diogenes' life of extreme simplicity was a brilliant statement about freedom or an impractical, even childish rejection of society. Could anyone really live like Diogenes? Or was his life just an act of rebellion against the status quo? Either way, his influence on the development of later philosophical schools, particularly the Stoics, can't be denied. As we wrap up this section, remember that philosophy isn't about finding one correct answer to the question of how to live. It's about exploring different ideas and deciding what resonates with you, whether it's the Stoics, the Epicureans, or the Cynics. These ancient thinkers challenge us to think deeply about what makes a meaningful life. And, as we'll see in the next section, these ideas would continue to evolve in fascinating ways as philosophy moved into the Middle Ages. As we journey further into the realm of philosophy, we now enter a period where the conversation begins to take on a new tone, one that intertwines with faith. The Middle Ages, with all its intrigue and turmoil, brought about a fascinating shift in how philosophers approached the great questions of life. This was a time when the rational explorations of ancient Greek philosophers began to merge with the teachings of Christianity. Suddenly, philosophy wasn't just about reason and logic. It became about understanding the divine, the soul, and the afterlife. We begin our exploration of the Middle Ages with one of the most influential thinkers of this period, Saint Augustine. Born in North Africa in 354 CE, Augustine's early life was far from saintly. In fact, he spent much of his youth indulging in pleasures of all kinds, pleasure that, according to him, left him feeling empty and unsatisfied. It was through his conversion to Christianity that Augustine's philosophy began to take shape. His Confessions, an autobiographical account of his spiritual journey, is one of the cornerstones of Western thought, offering deep insight into the human condition, sin, and redemption. Augustine's central idea was that human beings are fundamentally flawed and in need of divine grace. He believed that only by turning toward God could individuals overcome their natural inclinations toward selfishness and sin. For Augustine, the pursuit of the good life wasn't about mastering logic or seeking pleasure. It was about surrendering to God's will. And this search for divine truth, this quest for the ultimate good, was the path to peace. Historians still argue whether Augustine's focus on divine grace and his rejection of human reason went too far. Was his philosophy a necessary antidote to a world obsessed with worldly pleasures and reason? Or did it stifle the very human capacity for reason and self-improvement? Augustine's ideas laid the foundation for Christian theology, but his dismissal of secular philosophy would shape the way later thinkers interacted with the ancient Greek philosophers. As Christianity gained prominence, another great thinker emerged to build on Augustine's ideas, Thomas Aquinas. Born in the 13th century, Aquinas sought to reconcile the teachings of Aristotle, the great pagan philosopher, with Christian theology. Aquinas was determined to show that faith and reason could coexist, arguing that both were necessary to understand the world and the divine. For him, reason could reveal truths about the natural world, while faith was necessary to understand the divine truths revealed in Scripture. Aquinas' work was groundbreaking because he didn't discard the ideas of ancient Greek philosophers like Aristotle. Instead, he brought them into the Christian fold, arguing that Aristotle's philosophy could actually help explain the nature of God and the universe. He believed that reason and faith were not opposites, but complementary. Aquinas' synthesis of faith and reason became the standard for Catholic philosophy and theology for centuries, shaping the intellectual landscape of the Middle Ages and beyond. Historians continue to debate the influence of Aquinas. Was his attempt to merge Aristotelian philosophy with Christian doctrine a triumph of intellectual clarity, or did it overly constrain philosophical thought by insisting that faith must always come first. Aquinas' insistence on the compatibility of faith and reason would become a key point of contention during the later periods of intellectual upheaval, particularly in the Enlightenment. However, Aquinas' impact on Christian thought and the development of Western philosophy is undeniable. Now, while Augustine and Aquinas were focused on the divine, not all medieval thinkers were so concerned with theology. In fact, some were more concerned with the human experience and how to make sense of it in a world that was often harsh, unpredictable, and rife with suffering. This brings us to a figure who, in his own way, posed the most profound existential questions of all, the philosopher and poet Dante Alighieri. Dante, perhaps best known for his Divine Comedy, takes us on a journey through the afterlife, through hell, purgatory, and finally heaven. But Dante's philosophy isn't just about the afterlife. It's about the human condition here on earth. Dante saw life as a moral journey, one where every decision had consequences and where people could either ascend toward divine grace or descend into despair. His work offers a rich exploration of sin, redemption, and divine justice. In Dante's view, the good life was about living virtuously and aligning oneself with divine order. Historians debate whether Dante's work is purely theological or whether it contains profound insights into the human condition beyond religious doctrine. Some view Dante's Divine Comedy as a moral guide to living, while others argue that its obsession with divine punishment and reward limits its philosophical depth. Nonetheless, Dante's vision of the journey toward divine justice has influenced Western thought for centuries, from literature to theology, and continues to be studied for its depiction of human struggle and divine retribution. The Middle Ages, then, represent a time when philosophy became more than just an intellectual exercise. It became a tool for understanding the soul and the divine. Figures like Augustine, Aquinas, and Dante used philosophy to probe the mysteries of life, but they also sought to understand humanity's place within the larger framework of God's will. For them, philosophy was not just a way to understand the physical world, but a way to find meaning in an often chaotic, suffering-filled existence. Historians still debate the ultimate significance of medieval philosophy. Was it a period of intellectual stagnation held back by religious dogma? Or was it a time of profound spiritual and moral reflection that shaped the future of Western thought? Perhaps the truth lies somewhere in between. What is certain, however, is that the ideas explored during this time would set the stage for the Renaissance and the eventual rise of modern philosophy. As we leave the Middle Ages behind, we step into a new era, the Renaissance, a time of rebirth, rediscovery, and the flourishing of humanism. The Renaissance, stretching from the 14th to the 17th centuries, wasn't just about art, literature, and science. It was also about philosophy. This period represented a profound shift in how thinkers saw the world. No longer were they bound solely by religious doctrine. Instead, they began to focus more on human potential, individual experience, and the practical applications of knowledge. In the Renaissance, philosophers moved away from medieval scholasticism, the blending of faith and reason, and embraced a more secular approach. This was a time when thinkers like Niccolo Machiavelli, Erasmus, and Michel de Montaigne began questioning long-held assumptions and exploring new ways of thinking about the world. The idea that humanity could improve itself through education, self-reflection, and rational thought became central to the Renaissance worldview. One of the most significant figures of this intellectual revolution was Machiavelli, best known for his political treatise, The Prince. Machiavelli's philosophy was pragmatic, grounded in real-world experience rather than abstract idealism. He argued that rulers must be willing to do whatever it takes to maintain power and protect the state, even if that means deceit, manipulation, or violence. His famous statement, "The ends justify the means," reflects the cold, calculating nature of his political thought. Historians still debate whether Machiavelli's work is a cynical blueprint for tyrants or a realist's manual for navigating the complexities of power. Some see him as a precursor to modern political science, while others criticize him for advocating immoral behavior. Either way, his ideas have had a lasting impact on political philosophy, influencing everything from the way leaders govern to the ethical questions surrounding statecraft. On the other end of the spectrum, we have thinkers like Erasmus, who emphasized the importance of reason, education, and virtue. Erasmus, a Dutch philosopher and theologian, was deeply critical of the corrupt practices of the church and society. His most famous work, In Praise of Folly, used humor and satire to expose the flaws and contradictions in both religious and secular institutions. Erasmus believed that true wisdom could only be achieved through the cultivation of inner virtue and the pursuit of knowledge. Historians have long debated whether Erasmus's ideas were too idealistic for their time, or whether they represented the first stirrings of modern humanism. Was he merely critiquing the corruption of his era, or was he offering a more hopeful vision of what humanity could become? Regardless, his work laid the groundwork for the Reformation and helped shape the intellectual climate that would later foster the Enlightenment. Then there's Michel de Montaigne, whose essays helped lay the foundation for modern skepticism and the subjective view of the self. Montaigne's work was groundbreaking because it focused on the individual experience, questioning universal truths, and encouraging a more personal, introspective approach to philosophy. He famously said, "What do I know?" a statement that encapsulates his skepticism toward the ability of humans to know anything with absolute certainty. Montaigne's philosophy was both personal and universal, as he used his own life experiences to explore broader questions about human nature, ethics, and society. He was one of the first thinkers to truly embrace the idea that the individual perspective was a valuable source of knowledge. Historians still debate whether Montaigne's emphasis on the subjective nature of knowledge was a revolutionary step forward or a retreat into relativism. Was his skepticism a necessary correction to the arrogance of the medieval scholars, or did it lead to a world where nothing could be truly known or trusted? As we move through the Renaissance, we see how these thinkers, Machiavelli, Erasmus, and Montaigne, began to challenge the old paradigms and lay the intellectual groundwork for the modern world. They asked difficult questions about power, knowledge, and human nature, often with a dose of skepticism and realism. They helped shift the focus of philosophy away from abstract metaphysics and toward practical concerns, politics, ethics, and the individual's place in the world. One of the most important legacies of Renaissance philosophy was the birth of modern humanism, a philosophy that emphasized the value and potential of the individual. Humanism looked to the classical past for inspiration reviving the study of ancient Greek and Roman texts, but it also embraced the idea that humans were capable of shaping their own destiny through reason, education, and self-determination. This humanist philosophy would become the intellectual foundation for the Enlightenment, the next great philosophical revolution. But while the Renaissance thinkers were busy rediscovering the classics and exploring human potential, another philosophical revolution was already brewing on the horizon. It would be in the 17th and 18th centuries, with the rise of modern science and rationalism, that philosophy would undergo another profound shift, moving toward the Enlightenment ideals of reason, liberty, and progress. Figures like René Descartes, John Locke, and Immanuel Kant would continue the work of the Renaissance thinkers, challenging long-standing beliefs and pushing the boundaries of human knowledge and understanding. Historians still debate whether the Renaissance was truly the beginning of modern philosophy or just an intellectual interlude between the medieval period and the Enlightenment. Was it the birth of the modern world, or was it a revival of older ideas that paved the way for later developments? The answer depends on how one views the intellectual currents of the time. What is clear, however, is that the Renaissance represented a pivotal moment in the history of philosophy, one that shifted the focus from divine truths to human experience and potential. As we venture into the 17th century, we find ourselves on the brink of a new era, an era that would forever alter the way we think about the world. The Enlightenment, or Age of Reason, marked a monumental shift in philosophical thought. This was the time when philosophy, science, and politics began to converge, and thinkers began to champion reason as the highest authority over superstition, tradition, and religion. It was a period of intellectual awakening, fueled by curiosity, skepticism, and a growing desire to understand the natural world. At the forefront of this movement was René Descartes, a philosopher whose name has become synonymous with modern philosophy. Descartes' influence on Western thought cannot be overstated. His famous declaration, cogito, ergo sum, I think, therefore I am, is often considered the foundation of modern epistemology, the study of knowledge, and how we can be certain of anything. Descartes sought to establish a firm foundation for knowledge by doubting everything, even his own existence, until he could prove it through reason. This radical skepticism, known as Cartesian doubt, became a hallmark of his philosophy. For Descartes, the only thing he could be absolutely certain of was his own thinking mind. Historians still debate whether Descartes' emphasis on doubt and reason paved the way for modern science, or whether it led to an overly abstract and detached view of the world. Was his method of radical doubt a necessary step in the evolution of thought, or did it create a division between mind and body, reason and emotion that we continue to grapple with today? Some philosophers argue that Descartes' insistence on separating the mind from the body created a false dichotomy that has shaped Western thought in problematic ways. Others believe that his skepticism and search for certainty provided a much-needed break from centuries of dogma and superstition, laying the groundwork for the scientific revolution. As Descartes was laying the foundations for modern philosophy, across the English Channel, John Locke was developing his own revolutionary ideas about the nature of knowledge and the self. Locke, often regarded as the father of empiricism, rejected Descartes' emphasis on innate ideas and instead argued that knowledge comes from experience. According to Locke, the human mind is like a blank slate, tabula rasa, upon which experiences are written. This idea had profound implications for how we understand human nature, morality, and education. Locke believed that all knowledge, from our understanding of the world to our sense of right and wrong, was derived from sensory experience and reflection. Locke's philosophy was a direct challenge to the idea of divine authority and the notion that certain truths were beyond human understanding. He argued that human beings were capable of rational thought and could govern themselves through reason and consent. His work on political philosophy, particularly in two treatises of government, laid the intellectual groundwork for modern democracy. Locke's ideas on individual rights, the separation of powers, and the social contract would go on to influence the development of liberal political thought and the American Revolution. Historians still argue whether Locke's empiricism was the right approach to understanding human knowledge. Was his idea that the mind is a blank slate too simplistic, or does it offer a more practical and grounded view of human nature than Descartes' more abstract theories? While some criticize Locke for not accounting for the complexities of human consciousness, his work has had an enduring influence on philosophy, politics, and education. Meanwhile, in Germany, Immanuel Kant was embarking on his own philosophical revolution. Kant's work represents a monumental shift in the way we think about knowledge, ethics, and the nature of reality. In his critique of pure reason, Kant sought to reconcile the rationalism of Descartes with the empiricism of Locke. He argued that while all knowledge begins with experience, the mind plays an active role in shaping that knowledge. According to Kant, the mind does not passively receive information from the senses. Instead, it organizes and structures that information in a way that allows us to understand the world. This idea is known as transcendental idealism, the belief that the human mind imposes certain categories of thought, such as space and time, onto the world in order to make sense of it. Kant's philosophy was groundbreaking because it challenged both the rationalists and the empiricists of his time. He argued that we can never know the things in themselves, the true nature of reality outside of our experience. Instead, all we can know is how the world appears to us, shaped by the categories of our mind. Kant's work also had a profound impact on ethics, particularly with his concept of the categorical imperative, which is the idea that moral actions must be universalizable. That is, they must be actions that anyone could consistently will as a universal law. Historians still debate the implications of Kant's transcendental idealism. Was Kant right to insist that we can never know the world as it truly is? Or did he create an unnecessary barrier between perception and reality? His views on ethics, particularly the categorical imperative, also remain controversial. Is it possible to establish universal moral laws, or is morality inherently subjective? Kant's philosophy has continued to influence not only metaphysics and epistemology, but also political theory, ethics, and aesthetics. As we move toward the 19th century, we encounter another thinker who would forever change the landscape of philosophy, Friedrich Nietzsche. Nietzsche's philosophy is famously difficult to categorize, but one of his central ideas was the concept of the Übermensch, or overman. Nietzsche believed that traditional moral values, particularly those rooted in Christianity, were life-denying and stifled human creativity and potential. In contrast, the Übermensch was an individual who had transcended conventional morality, creating their own values, and embracing the fullness of life. Nietzsche's ideas about the will to power and the rejection of traditional values were radical, and they continue to provoke controversy. Was Nietzsche advocating for a kind of elitism where only a few exceptional individuals could achieve greatness, or was he encouraging a more universal rejection of societal constraints? His critique of traditional morality, religion, and even democracy has led some to associate him with nihilism or authoritarianism. Others argue that Nietzsche was a visionary who sought to free humanity from the shackles of outdated beliefs and help us realize our full potential. Historians still debate whether Nietzsche's philosophy was a celebration of human creativity or a dangerous rejection of moral order. Some see him as a prophet of individual freedom, while others warn that his ideas have been misinterpreted and used to justify harmful ideologies. Regardless of how we interpret Nietzsche, his ideas continue to challenge our understanding of morality, culture, and human potential. As we approach the modern era, it's clear that philosophy has come a long way from the ancient Greeks. From Descartes' quest for certainty to Nietzsche's radical rethinking of values, the journey of philosophical thought has been one of constant evolution, challenge, and renewal. Yet, despite the many changes in how we approach these questions, the central concern of philosophy has remained constant: the search for meaning, understanding, and a better way to live. And in the end, perhaps that is what philosophy is all about: asking the hard questions and never settling for easy answers. As the 19th century unfolded, philosophy took a dramatic turn toward existentialism and the exploration of individual freedom. The tumult of industrialization, growing political movements, and the increasing awareness of human suffering led thinkers to question the very foundations of existence and meaning. This new wave of thought rejected the optimism of the Enlightenment and the idea that rationality alone could solve human problems. Instead, existentialists emphasized the personal experience of life, our isolation, our choices, and the anxiety that accompanies our awareness of mortality. At the forefront of this movement was Søren Kierkegaard, a Danish philosopher often regarded as the father of existentialism. Kierkegaard was deeply concerned with the individual's relationship with God and the nature of faith. He believed that existence was inherently absurd, marked by suffering, uncertainty, and anxiety. But despite this, he argued that individuals must make a leap of faith to confront their own existence and embrace the unknown. Kierkegaard's philosophy focused on the individual's struggle with despair and the need to take personal responsibility for one's own life and choices. Kierkegaard's existentialism wasn't about rejecting God or meaning, but rather about confronting the tension between faith and reason. For him, the ultimate task of human life was to make an authentic choice to commit to something greater than oneself, even in the face of doubt and uncertainty. He famously referred to this as the knight of faith, someone who chooses to live by an inner conviction that transcends rational understanding. His work on anxiety, despair, and the subjective nature of existence would go on to influence existential thinkers like Jean-Paul Sartre and Martin Heidegger. Historians still argue about Kierkegaard's place in the existentialist tradition. Was his focus on religious faith and personal commitment a crucial step in existential thought, or did it overly focus on the individual's relationship with God, neglecting broader social concerns? Kierkegaard's emphasis on subjective experience challenged the more rational approaches of his time, and his exploration of the individual's inner life remains one of the most profound contributions to modern philosophy. Around the same time, another philosopher, Friedrich Nietzsche, was dramatically reshaping philosophical thought with his radical ideas about morality, religion, and human potential. Nietzsche's philosophy is infamous for its rejection of traditional moral values, particularly those rooted in Christianity. He argued that the moral system imposed by religion had repressed human creativity, freedom, and vitality. Nietzsche famously declared that God is dead, a provocative statement suggesting that the decline of religious belief would require humanity to create new values to live by. Central to Nietzsche's thought was the idea of the Übermensch, or overman, an individual who transcends the limitations of conventional morality to create their own values and embrace life in its fullest form. The Übermensch represents a person who does not rely on societal norms or divine commandments, but instead lives authentically and creatively, embracing both the beauty and the chaos of existence. Nietzsche also introduced the concept of the will to power, the idea that human beings are driven by a fundamental force to assert themselves and shape their own lives, a force that can be either destructive or transformative, depending on how it is channeled. Historians and philosophers still debate the implications of Nietzsche's philosophy. Was he advocating for a return to an aristocratic, elitist form of individualism, or was he championing a radical rethinking of human potential and freedom? Nietzsche's critique of morality, religion, and traditional philosophy was both liberating and unsettling, and his ideas continue to provoke strong reactions. Some view him as a prophet of individual freedom, while others see his philosophy as a dangerous rejection of moral order. Meanwhile, in France, Jean-Paul Sartre was taking Nietzsche's existentialism in a new direction, emphasizing radical freedom and the burden of personal responsibility. Sartre, perhaps the most famous existentialist of the 20th century, argued that human beings are condemned to be free. That is, we are responsible for creating meaning in our lives through our choices and actions. Sartre famously declared that existence precedes essence, meaning that we are not born with a predefined purpose or identity. Instead, we must define ourselves through the choices we make. For Sartre, the anxiety that comes with freedom is part of what it means to be human. Sartre's existentialism was revolutionary because it denied the existence of any inherent meaning or moral framework. According to Sartre, life has no ultimate purpose, and it is up to each individual to create meaning through their actions. This radical freedom, however, also comes with immense responsibility. Sartre's philosophy has had a profound impact on literature, psychology, and social theory, but it has also been criticized for its emphasis on individualism and its failure to account for the social and political dimensions of human existence. Historians still debate Sartre's contributions to existentialism. Some view his emphasis on freedom and authenticity as a powerful call to live authentically, while others see it as a rejection of social responsibility. Was Sartre's focus on individual freedom too inwardly focused, ignoring the need for collective action and social change? Whatever the answer, Sartre's existentialism has influenced countless thinkers, writers, and activists, making him a towering figure in modern philosophy. As existentialism took root in the 20th century, another major shift was underway in the realm of philosophy. The focus was no longer solely on the individual, but also on the broader context in which people live, the social, political, and cultural forces that shape our lives. One of the most important movements in this regard was Marxism, which argued that human history and society could only be understood in terms of material conditions and economic forces. Karl Marx, the founder of Marxism, believed that history was driven by class struggle, with the working class, or proletariat, being exploited by the ruling class, or bourgeoisie. Marx's philosophy was grounded in materialism, the idea that the physical world and economic conditions are the primary determinants of human consciousness and behavior. He argued that true liberation could only be achieved through the overthrow of capitalist systems, leading to a society where the means of production are owned collectively and wealth is distributed more equally. Historians continue to debate the success of Marx's ideas, especially in light of the political movements that claimed to be inspired by Marxism, such as the Russian Revolution and the rise of communism in the 20th century. Was Marx right to believe that revolution was the key to human freedom, or did his ideas lead to oppressive regimes that stifled personal freedom and creativity? These questions remain as relevant today as they were in Marx's time. As the tension between capitalism and socialism continues to shape global politics, as we look back on the 19th and 20th centuries, it's clear that philosophy has undergone a profound transformation. From the radical individualism of existentialism to the materialism of Marxism, philosophers have grappled with the question of what it means to live a meaningful life in a world that often seems chaotic and unjust. Yet, despite the many different approaches to these questions, one thing remains constant: the search for truth, purpose, and authenticity is at the heart of philosophy. As we shift from the deeply personal and existential to a broader view of modern philosophy, the 20th century introduces yet another seismic shift, this time in how we understand human existence in relation to language, culture, and society. Here, philosophy moves away from individual subjectivity and focuses on the structures that shape thought and experience. This is the realm of postmodernism, a movement that questions the very foundations of truth, reality, and identity itself. The philosophical landscape in the 20th century was vastly different from earlier periods. The world had experienced the horrors of two world wars, the collapse of empires, and the rise of technology and consumerism. The certainty that characterized the Enlightenment and the philosophical optimism of the Renaissance was slowly replaced by a recognition of the complexities, contradictions, and uncertainties of modern life. This shift was crystallized by thinkers like Ludwig Wittgenstein, Michel Foucault, and Jacques Derrida, who each, in their own way, challenged the idea that knowledge, truth, and meaning could be fixed, objective, or stable. Let's start with Ludwig Wittgenstein, a philosopher whose work on language would redefine the very way we think about meaning. Wittgenstein's early philosophy, particularly his Tractatus Logico-Philosophicus, proposed that the structure of language mirrored the structure of reality. He believed that by analyzing the logical structure of language, we could understand the world. However, Wittgenstein's later work, especially in philosophical investigations, took a dramatic turn. In his later philosophy, Wittgenstein argued that meaning isn't something fixed or absolute. Rather, meaning is determined by how language is used in specific contexts. In other words, words don't have intrinsic meaning. They only make sense within the language games we play in society. Wittgenstein's shift away from logical structure and toward the practical use of language opened up new ways of thinking about meaning, truth, and understanding. He argued that our understanding of the world is shaped by the languages we use, and that different communities or cultures may have entirely different ways of understanding reality. This relativistic view of meaning was a precursor to the postmodern philosophy that would follow. Historians and philosophers still debate whether Wittgenstein's later work truly undermines the possibility of objective truth, or whether it merely highlights the complexity of human language. Some see his views as liberating, while others worry that they lead to a kind of philosophical nihilism, where meaning becomes so fluid that it risks losing all stability. While Wittgenstein was examining language, Michel Foucault was exploring power, knowledge, and the ways in which societal structures shape our understanding of truth. Foucault's work in the mid-20th century focused on how power is exercised in society, particularly in institutions like prisons, hospitals, and schools. His famous theory of biopower described how modern societies regulate individuals not just through laws and politics, but through everyday practices and norms. According to Foucault, power is not only concentrated in governments or authorities, it operates at every level of society, influencing how we think about ourselves, others, and the world. Foucault's most famous work, Discipline and Punish, examined the history of punishment and how the concept of the soul became a tool of social control. His later work, such as The History of Sexuality, explored how sexuality and gender have been historically constructed and regulated by societal norms and institutions. Foucault's exploration of how knowledge is intertwined with power led to his famous concept of power knowledge, the idea that what we know and believe is shaped by the structures of power in society. Historians and philosophers still debate Foucault's ideas. Is he right to suggest that knowledge and power are so inseparable that we cannot understand truth without understanding the power structures that shape it? Or does his theory overstate the role of power in shaping knowledge and ignore the possibility of objective truths that transcend cultural or political influence? What is certain is that Foucault's work has had a profound influence on everything from sociology and political theory to feminism and queer theory, reshaping how we think about authority, truth, and identity. If Wittgenstein's work challenged our understanding of language, and Foucault's work challenged our understanding of power, Jacques Derrida's philosophy challenged our understanding of meaning itself. Derrida, one of the most famous figures associated with postmodernism, introduced the concept of deconstruction, a method of analyzing texts that seeks to expose the underlying assumptions, contradictions, and power dynamics embedded in language. According to Derrida, language is inherently unstable. Words can never fully capture the complexity of reality, and meanings are always shifting and context dependent. Derrida's work focused on the ways in which Western philosophy has relied on binary oppositions, such as mind-body, reason, emotion, male, female, and how these oppositions create hierarchies that privilege one term over the other. Through deconstruction, Derrida sought to reveal how these oppositions are not natural or essential, but are constructed by language and culture. His work has been deeply influential in literary theory, cultural studies, and philosophy, but it has also been heavily criticized for its perceived relativism and its rejection of objective truth. Historians and philosophers still debate the implications of Derrida's deconstruction. Is he right to suggest that meaning is always unstable? Or does his view of language leave us in a world where nothing can ever be known for certain? Some see Derrida's work as a radical critique of traditional philosophy, while others argue that it leads to a kind of intellectual paralysis where everything is reduced to interpretation and nothing is ever fixed. The postmodern critiques of Wittgenstein, Foucault, and Derrida represent a dramatic departure from earlier philosophical traditions, which assumed that truth, meaning, and knowledge could be discovered through reason, science, or religious faith. Postmodern thinkers questioned the very possibility of objective knowledge and insisted that all beliefs and ideas are contingent, shaped by history, culture, and power. Historians still debate whether postmodernism represents the end of traditional philosophy or whether it's simply a new phase in the evolution of thought. Does it mark the collapse of reason and meaning, or is it a necessary corrective to the overconfidence of modernity? Regardless of where you stand, it's clear that postmodernism has had a profound impact on everything from art and literature to politics and gender studies, reshaping how we think about identity, truth, and reality. The postmodern critique also had significant implications for contemporary philosophy. It encouraged a more pluralistic, relativistic view of knowledge and truth, one that embraces ambiguity and uncertainty. While this view has been liberating for many, it has also sparked new questions about the limits of relativism and the search for meaning in a world that no longer seems to offer any fixed answers. As we delve deeper into the 20th century, we encounter the rise of another major movement, pragmatism. This school of thought, which emerged in the United States in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, sought to break away from the abstract theorizing that had dominated much of European philosophy. Pragmatists, led by thinkers like Charles Peirce, William James, and John Dewey, were concerned with the practical implications of ideas, focusing on how beliefs and concepts could be used to solve real-world problems and improve human life. At its core, pragmatism was a rejection of both the idealism of philosophers like Plato and the skepticism of philosophers like Descartes. Pragmatists believed that the truth of an idea should be judged by its practical effects and its ability to help us navigate the world. Instead of worrying about whether an idea corresponds to an objective reality, pragmatists asked, does this idea work in practice? Truth, for them, was something that evolved over time, shaped by human experience, and was always subject to revision based on new information and better solutions. One of the most influential pragmatists was William James, who famously argued that the meaning of an idea lies in its consequences. In his book, Pragmatism, James wrote that the truth of an idea is not a stagnant property, but a process, something that develops and evolves with experience. This view was radical because it suggested that truth is not static, but something that is continually tested and shaped by our experiences in the world. For James, the value of an idea depended on how well it helped individuals live more fulfilling and meaningful lives. He famously stated that if a belief works, in a practical sense, if it helps people navigate their experiences, solve problems, and achieve their goals, then it can be considered true. Pragmatism was also a rejection of the notion that we can ever fully know the world in an objective sense. Instead, pragmatists argued that knowledge is always provisional and always subject to change. This fluid, evolving view of truth and knowledge was a stark contrast to the rigid certainty of earlier philosophical systems. For pragmatists, the goal of philosophy was not to uncover eternal truths, but to create useful frameworks that help us engage with the world and solve problems. Historians still debate the legacy of pragmatism. Was it a refreshing antidote to the excessive abstraction of European philosophy, or did it simply replace one form of dogmatism with another? Some see pragmatism as a deeply democratic philosophy that encourages practical problem solving and an open-minded approach to life, while others worry that its emphasis on practical results can lead to a kind of relativism where anything can be justified as long as it works. Regardless of the criticisms, pragmatism's emphasis on the practical value of ideas has had a lasting impact on modern philosophy, particularly in areas like education, political theory, and psychology. At the same time, the 20th century witnessed the rise of analytic philosophy, a school of thought that focused on the logical analysis of language and meaning. The analytic tradition, which began with thinkers like Gottlob Frege and Bertrand Russell, sought to clarify the meaning of philosophical concepts through the tools of logic and language. For analytic philosophers, many traditional philosophical problems, such as questions about metaphysics and epistemology, were seen as misunderstandings or confusions arising from vague or imprecise language. Ludwig Wittgenstein, whom we encountered earlier, played a significant role in the development of analytic philosophy. In his early work, Wittgenstein had focused on the relationship between language and the world, arguing that language mirrors the structure of reality. However, in his later work, he rejected the idea that philosophy could provide definitive answers to metaphysical questions. Instead, he argued that many philosophical problems arise from misunderstandings of language, and that the task of philosophy was to clarify how words are used in different contexts. Wittgenstein's later philosophy emphasized the importance of ordinary language and the practical use of words in everyday life, marking a shift away from abstract theorizing and toward a more pragmatic, down-to-earth approach to philosophical problems. In the analytic tradition, philosophers focused on the logical analysis of language and meaning. Bertrand Russell, another central figure in analytic philosophy, sought to reduce philosophical problems to their logical foundations. Russell's work in logic and mathematics had a profound impact on the development of philosophy, particularly in the areas of epistemology and the philosophy of language. He famously argued that many traditional philosophical problems could be resolved by analyzing the structure of language and the logical relationships between concepts. Despite its success in certain areas, the analytic tradition has faced criticism for its narrow focus on language and logic, and for its tendency to dismiss broader, existential questions about human existence. Some critics argue that the analytic tradition, with its emphasis on precision and clarity, overlooks the complexity and richness of human experience. In response, many philosophers in the 20th century turned to more interdisciplinary approaches, incorporating insights from psychology, sociology, and the arts into their philosophical work. One such thinker was Maurice Merleau-Ponty, a French philosopher who was central to the development of phenomenology, a philosophical movement that focuses on the lived experience of the individual. Merleau-Ponty rejected both the abstract intellectualism of analytic philosophy and the rigid, mechanistic view of the body that dominated much of Western thought. Instead, he emphasized the importance of perception and the embodied nature of human experience. For Merleau-Ponty, our experience of the world is not something detached from our bodies or our senses. Rather, it is deeply interconnected with our physical existence. Merleau-Ponty's work had a profound impact on existentialism, phenomenology, and even the emerging fields of cognitive science and psychology. His focus on the embodied nature of human experience challenged traditional distinctions between mind and body, and his work continues to influence contemporary philosophy and interdisciplinary fields. As we look at the 20th century and the development of philosophy, one thing is clear: the landscape has been anything but static. From the rise of pragmatism and analytic philosophy to the flourishing of existentialism and phenomenology, thinkers have continued to push the boundaries of what it means to think, to know, and to live. The questions that once seemed so simple — what is truth? What is the good life? What does it mean to be human? — have become infinitely more complex, but also more interesting. In many ways, the history of philosophy in the 20th century was a response to the increasing complexity and uncertainty of the modern world. As technology advanced, as political systems shifted, and as global conflicts reshaped societies, philosophers responded with new theories, new questions, and new ways of thinking. What is clear is that philosophy is not just a collection of abstract ideas. It is a living, breathing pursuit that is deeply intertwined with the world we inhabit. As the 20th century progressed, philosophy moved from existential questions and debates about the nature of language and power to even more practical concerns. As the world became increasingly interconnected and globalized, thinkers began to focus more on how philosophy could address social issues, ethics, and the structures of societies. The rise of political movements, civil rights struggles, and social changes prompted philosophers to ask, how can we build a just society? What does it mean to live ethically in the modern world? One of the most important figures to emerge in the mid-20th century was John Rawls, an American philosopher who revolutionized political philosophy with his theory of justice. Rawls' A Theory of Justice, 1971, introduced the concept of justice as fairness, which sought to provide a fair and just method for distributing wealth, opportunities, and resources in society. Drawing on the social contract tradition of philosophers like Rousseau and Locke, Rawls argued that a just society is one in which individuals in an original position of equality would agree to certain principles of justice. The most famous of these principles is the difference principle, which allows for inequalities in wealth and power only if they benefit the least advantaged members of society. Rawls's theory became highly influential in the field of political philosophy as it offered a new framework for understanding justice that moved beyond utilitarianism and focused on fairness. His idea of the veil of ignorance, where individuals, when deciding the principles of justice, must do so without knowing their own social or economic status, was particularly compelling. Rawls' work has shaped debates on everything from wealth redistribution and healthcare to education and civil rights. However, philosophers still debate whether Rawls's theory is too idealistic or whether it can be realistically applied in the complex, unequal world we live in. Can justice as fairness ever truly be achieved, or does the very structure of society work against it? While Rawls was addressing issues of justice in the political realm, other thinkers were exploring how philosophy could help us live more ethically in our personal lives. One of the most influential ethical theories of the 20th century came from the field of bioethics, particularly through the work of Peter Singer. In his book, Animal Liberation, 1975, Singer challenged the way humans think about their ethical obligations to animals. He argued that we should extend the principle of equal consideration to all beings who can experience suffering, not just humans. This idea, which became the foundation of the animal rights movement, called for a radical shift in how we think about our relationships with non-human animals. Singer's utilitarian philosophy emphasizes the greatest good for the greatest number, applying this principle to various areas of life, from the treatment of animals to global poverty. His ideas on ethics have been both revolutionary and controversial, sparking debates about the ethics of factory farming, animal experimentation, and even the moral status of different species. In addition to his work on animals, Singer has also addressed issues such as euthanasia, infanticide, and the moral implications of global poverty, urging us to take more responsibility for the suffering of others, both near and far. But philosophers still question whether Singer's utilitarian approach, which often focuses on the consequences of actions, can provide a satisfying answer to complex moral dilemmas. Is utilitarianism too demanding, or does it offer a clear and rational way of making moral decisions? In the same vein as Rawls and Singer, philosophers in the latter half of the 20th century also began to address issues of gender, race, and identity. Feminist philosophy, which emerged alongside the feminist movements of the 1960s and 1970s, challenged the traditional, male-dominated philosophical canon. Figures like Simone de Beauvoir, Judith Butler, and bell hooks questioned the very concepts of gender and identity that had been taken for granted in much of Western thought. Simone de Beauvoir's The Second Sex, 1949, is often seen as one of the foundational texts of feminist philosophy. In it, de Beauvoir examines the ways in which women have historically been defined in relation to men, arguing that women have been treated as the other, an object rather than a subject. One is not born, but rather becomes a woman, she famously wrote, arguing that gender is not an innate biological fact, but a social construct imposed by society. This view was revolutionary because it turned traditional ideas about gender roles and sexual identity on their head. Judith Butler, building on de Beauvoir's ideas, introduced the concept of gender performativity in her book Gender Trouble, 1990. According to Butler, gender is not something we are, it is something we do. Gender is a performance, a series of repeated actions that become socially recognized as masculine or feminine. This radical idea challenges the binary understanding of gender as something fixed and biologically determined. Butler's work has been highly influential, not only in feminist philosophy, but also in queer theory and the study of sexuality. Feminist philosophy has profoundly changed the way we think about identity, power, and social structures. It has made us question how deeply ingrained societal expectations shape our understanding of who we are and how we interact with others. Yet, feminist philosophers also face challenges in dealing with issues of intersectionality, which emphasizes the overlapping and interconnected nature of social identities like race, class, gender, and sexuality. Can philosophy truly address the complexities of identity, or do traditional philosophical methods remain too limited to capture the full spectrum of human experience? While feminist philosophers were questioning traditional gender norms, thinkers like Kwame Anthony Appiah and Frantz Fanon were challenging Western ideas of race and identity. Fanon's Black Skin, White Masks, 1952, and Appiah's In My Father's House, 1992, explored the effects of colonialism, racism, and the formation of identities in a globalized world. Fanon, influenced by existentialism, argued that colonialism dehumanized both the colonizer and the colonized, shaping their sense of identity in ways that were both psychologically and socially damaging. Appiah, on the other hand, focused on how notions of race and identity are constructed in relation to culture and power, urging for a more fluid and inclusive understanding of identity in a multicultural world. Both philosophers asked important questions about the intersection of race, identity, and philosophy. What does it mean to belong to a particular racial group? And how do our identities shift in a globalized, post-colonial world? Can we ever truly escape the histories of colonialism and racism that have shaped our identities? Or are we condemned to live with them? These questions continue to resonate in today's discussions about race, identity, and the ongoing struggle for equality. The 20th century was a time of unprecedented philosophical innovation, as thinkers across various traditions grappled with questions about justice, identity, language, and power. From Rawls's theory of justice to Singer's ethics of animal rights, from de Beauvoir's feminist philosophy to Foucault's critique of power, philosophers sought to understand the world and our place within it. But as the century drew to a close, it became clear that philosophy was no longer about finding universal, objective truths. Instead, it was about exploring the complexities, contradictions, and subjective experiences that make us who we are. The turn of the 21st century saw philosophy shifting even further into the realms of ethics, technology, and global interconnectedness. As the world rapidly changed due to technological advances, the rise of the internet, and the increasing influence of capitalism, philosophers began to explore new avenues to address contemporary concerns. Issues surrounding artificial intelligence, biotechnology, and environmental degradation moved to the forefront, prompting deep ethical debates about the future of humanity, identity, and the natural world. These concerns also opened up new dialogues about the intersection of philosophy and science, challenging traditional views about human autonomy, the mind, and consciousness. In the realm of technology, the advent of artificial intelligence, AI, has prompted a rethinking of what it means to be human. With the rise of AI and machine learning, questions surrounding the nature of intelligence and consciousness have come to the forefront of philosophical discourse. If machines can learn, think, and make decisions, what does that say about human cognition and decision making? Philosophers like John Searle and Hubert Dreyfus have engaged in debates about whether AI can truly replicate human consciousness or if it will always be limited to simulating thought. Searle's famous Chinese room argument, for instance, suggests that even if an AI can pass a test of language proficiency, it doesn't necessarily understand the language. It's merely manipulating symbols without any awareness or meaning. This raises profound questions about the nature of consciousness and the mind-body relationship. If a machine can appear to think, does it really think in the way humans do? Can consciousness be artificially replicated, or is it a uniquely human experience? The implications of these questions stretch far beyond academic debates, touching on the ethics of AI, autonomy, and the future of human employment. If machines become capable of performing tasks traditionally done by humans, what does that mean for our societal structures and our understanding of the value? Can we program machines to act ethically, or will they perpetuate biases inherent in their creators? Meanwhile, in the field of bioethics, philosophers have been grappling with questions about the implications of genetic engineering and biotechnology. Advances in CRISPR gene editing technology, for instance, have raised concerns about the morality of altering the genetic makeup of humans, animals, and even plants. Proponents argue that gene editing could cure genetic diseases and improve the quality of life for millions. However, critics warn of the potential dangers of designer babies, where wealthy individuals could select traits like intelligence or physical appearance, creating a new kind of genetic inequality. Philosophers like Julian Savulescu have argued that genetic enhancement may be ethically justified, particularly if it helps reduce suffering or promote well-being. However, there is a deep ethical divide over whether humanity should have the right to alter its own genetic code. What limits should there be on genetic modifications? Are there inherent dangers in tampering with the natural course of evolution? These questions are not just speculative. They have profound consequences for the future of medicine, ethics, and human identity. The ability to shape the genetic makeup of future generations could change the very definition of what it means to be human. Another critical area of contemporary philosophical concern is environmental ethics. The planet is facing unprecedented environmental crises, from climate change to biodiversity loss, and philosophers have been examining our moral obligations to the environment and future generations. Should we prioritize economic growth over environmental sustainability, or is the protection of the natural world a moral duty that transcends short-term economic interests? Thinkers like Alistair MacIntyre and Arne Naess have argued for a deeper, more holistic approach to ethics, one that incorporates our relationship with the natural world. and recognizes that human flourishing cannot be separated from the health of the planet. Philosophers in the field of environmental ethics challenge us to reconsider our role in the broader ecological system. Can we continue to exploit natural resources without consequence? Should we treat the environment as an external resource to be used for human benefit, or should we respect its inherent value and intrinsic rights? The environmental crisis has called into question the very foundations of capitalist consumerism, prompting a reevaluation of what constitutes a good life and how we can live sustainably. In the political realm, the concept of global justice has become a focal point of contemporary philosophy. As the world becomes increasingly interconnected through trade, travel, and communication, questions about the ethical obligations we have to people in distant countries have become more pressing. Philosophers like Thomas Pogge and Martha Nussbaum have argued for a new global justice framework, one that recognizes our collective responsibility to alleviate global poverty and human suffering. Pogge, for example, has criticized the global economic system for perpetuating inequality, arguing that affluent nations have a moral duty to help those who are disadvantaged by the structures of global capitalism. Nussbaum's capabilities approach, on the other hand, focuses on expanding the basic capabilities of all people, allowing them to live dignified, flourishing lives regardless of their circumstances. As the world becomes more globalized, philosophers are increasingly concerned with how to balance the interests of different nations, cultures, and peoples. Should we prioritize the rights of citizens within a particular nation, or should we consider the rights of all people equally, regardless of where they live? Global justice calls for a reevaluation of the traditional notions of sovereignty and national borders, emphasizing the need for international cooperation and solidarity to address global challenges. In the face of all these modern issues, philosophers continue to wrestle with questions that are not just abstract, but profoundly relevant to our lives today. Technology, bioethics, environmental issues, and global justice are not just philosophical debates. They are real-world problems that shape our future. Philosophy has moved beyond the ivory tower and become an essential tool for navigating the complexities of the modern world. The rapid pace of technological change, environmental degradation, and global interconnectedness has forced philosophers to rethink how we approach ethics, justice, and the very meaning of life. As we move forward, the challenge for philosophy is clear. How can we use our philosophical insights to create a world that is more just, more sustainable, and more compassionate? Can philosophy help us understand our relationship with technology, the environment, and each other in ways that lead to positive change? The future of philosophy lies in its ability to address the practical challenges of the 21st century, to provide frameworks for navigating our interconnected world, and to help us find meaning in an increasingly complex and rapidly changing society. As the 21st century unfolds, philosophy faces increasingly complex challenges that extend beyond the traditional confines of academic inquiry. With rapid technological advancements, environmental crises, and global political tensions, the role of philosophy in shaping both personal and societal values has never been more crucial. Philosophers today are tasked with addressing questions that intersect with science, technology, ethics, and social justice. From artificial intelligence to climate change, the questions we confront in this century are not only philosophical in nature, but are deeply rooted in the practical issues that shape our lives. One of the most pressing philosophical concerns in the contemporary world is the relationship between technology and humanity. As artificial intelligence, AI, and machine learning continue to advance at an exponential rate, we are forced to reconsider what it means to be human in a world where machines can replicate many of the cognitive functions that were once thought to be uniquely human. The rise of AI has led to debates about the future of work, the ethics of automation, and the potential for AI to surpass human intelligence, a concept often referred to as the singularity. Philosophers like Nick Bostrom have warned about the potential risks of creating superintelligent AI that could, in theory, surpass human control. Bostrom's concept of AI alignment raises the question of how we can ensure that AI systems are designed to act in ways that align with human values and ethics. As machines become increasingly autonomous, the line between human and machine intelligence becomes more blurred, leading to critical questions about autonomy, responsibility, and control. What rights, if any, should AI have? Should machines be granted moral consideration, or are they merely tools created to serve human needs? At the same time, thinkers like Shoshana Zuboff have argued that the rapid growth of surveillance capitalism poses a significant threat to individual autonomy and privacy. Zuboff's book, The Age of Surveillance Capitalism, explores how tech giants like Google, Facebook, and Amazon collect vast amounts of personal data and use it to shape consumer behavior. In a world where personal information is commodified and traded, questions of consent, privacy, and power take on new significance. What ethical responsibilities do tech companies have in safeguarding personal data, and what protections should individuals have in the digital age? Philosophers also continue to grapple with the implications of biotechnology and genetic engineering. Advances in gene editing technologies, such as CRISPR, have raised the possibility of altering the genetic makeup of humans, animals, and plants. While some view these technologies as a breakthrough that could eradicate genetic diseases and improve human health, others worry about the ethical implications of genetic modification. Should we have the power to design human embryos, select desirable traits, or even enhance our genetic potential? Philosophers like Julian Savulescu argue that genetic enhancement may be morally permissible if it promotes well-being and reduces suffering. However, there are those who caution against the potential for designer babies and genetic inequalities that could arise from such practices. The ethical questions surrounding biotechnology and genetic engineering are compounded by concerns about environmental sustainability and the future of the planet. The climate crisis is perhaps the most urgent issue of our time, and philosophy plays a crucial role in shaping our understanding of humanity's responsibility to the environment. The concept of environmental ethics has evolved over the past several decades, with philosophers advocating for a more inclusive view of ethics that extends beyond human beings to include the non-human world, animals, plants, and ecosystems. One important figure in environmental ethics is Peter Singer, whose utilitarian philosophy has been applied to the treatment of animals and the environment. Singer's argument that we should extend the principle of equal consideration to all sentient beings, those capable of experiencing pleasure and pain, has been central to the animal rights movement. However, the debate continues. Are we ethically obligated to prioritize the well-being of animals over human interests? How should we balance the needs of different species, including our own, in a world that faces ecological collapse? Environmental philosophers like Arne Naess have also developed the idea of deep ecology, which calls for a radical rethinking of our relationship with nature. Deep ecology suggests that the natural world has intrinsic value, independent of its usefulness to humans. This view challenges anthropocentrism, the belief that human beings are the most important entities in the universe, and advocates for a more ecocentric approach that places the well-being of the planet at the center of ethical decision-making. As the environmental crisis worsens, the philosophy of deep ecology urges us to reconsider the very foundations of our relationship with the Earth, asking us to move beyond mere sustainability toward a more holistic vision of ecological harmony. In addition to addressing the ethical implications of technology and the environment, philosophers today are also deeply engaged in social and political philosophy. In an era marked by rising inequality, social unrest, and the fragmentation of political discourse, thinkers like Nancy Fraser, Martha Nussbaum, and Amartya Sen are grappling with questions about justice, equality, and human capabilities. Fraser's work on justice emphasizes the importance of both redistribution, addressing economic inequalities, and recognition, addressing cultural and social inequalities, in achieving a fair and just society. Meanwhile, Nussbaum's capabilities approach challenges us to think about justice not just in terms of wealth or material resources, but in terms of the opportunities individuals have to live fulfilling lives. Sen's work focuses on the role of freedom and agency in development, arguing that true development is about expanding people's capabilities to live the lives they value. One of the most significant debates in contemporary social philosophy revolves around the question of global justice. As the world becomes increasingly interconnected, the question of whether justice should be limited to the nation-state or whether it should extend to the global community has become more pressing. Philosophers like Thomas Pogge argue that affluent nations have a moral obligation to help those living in poverty, as the global economic system is structured in a way that perpetuates inequality. Others, however, argue that justice must begin within national borders, as states have a primary responsibility to their own citizens. This debate is critical in a world facing global challenges such as poverty, climate change, and migration, where solutions will require international cooperation and solidarity. Philosophy today also faces the challenge of engaging with the complexities of identity in an increasingly diverse world. The recognition of gender, race, and sexual identity has brought important questions to the forefront of philosophical discourse. Thinkers like Judith Butler, Bell Hooks, and Cornel West have challenged traditional conceptions of identity and power, advocating for a more inclusive, intersectional approach to understanding the ways in which systems of oppression intersect and shape individual experiences. The philosophy of identity is no longer limited to questions of individual subjectivity, but has expanded to include collective struggles for justice, recognition, and equality. As we look to the future, the role of philosophy in shaping human society remains crucial. In an era of rapid technological change, environmental degradation, and social upheaval, philosophy can offer us the tools to critically examine the ethical implications of the choices we make. Whether in the realm of AI, biotechnology, environmental ethics, or social justice, philosophy challenges us to think deeply about our values and the world we want to create. It reminds us that the search for truth, meaning, and justice is not just an abstract intellectual exercise, but something that must guide our actions in the world. As we continue our exploration of contemporary philosophy, we can see how the debates of the past century have shaped our current understanding of ethics, society, and human potential. The 21st century has become a crossroads for philosophy, where new technologies, social movements, and global crises force philosophers to grapple with questions that may have seemed abstract in earlier eras, but are now immediate and pressing. Technology, the environment, politics, and identity continue to intersect in ways that demand philosophical responses that are both practical and profound. One of the most significant areas of contemporary philosophy is the intersection of technology and ethics, particularly in regard to emerging technologies like artificial intelligence, AI, biotechnology, and genetic engineering. As we've seen, the rapid development of AI raises important questions about the nature of intelligence, autonomy, and human responsibility. As AI systems become more advanced, the line between human and machine intelligence becomes more blurred, prompting us to rethink how we define consciousness and moral responsibility. Can machines be held accountable for their actions? What ethical frameworks can we apply to AI systems that operate autonomously, making decisions based on algorithms? Philosophers like Peter Singer, who famously advocated for the ethical treatment of animals, have expanded their work into discussions about AI and automation, asking whether machines and robots should be treated with moral consideration. Some philosophers argue that as AI systems become more complex, they should be granted some form of ethical consideration, especially if they begin to exhibit characteristics such as self-awareness or the capacity to feel emotions. Others, however, contend that machines, no matter how advanced, will never truly possess the moral status of humans because they lack the capacity for subjective experience. These questions are becoming more than theoretical, as AI systems are increasingly integrated into areas like healthcare, law enforcement, and even military decision-making. The ethics of AI in these fields is particularly urgent, as the consequences of autonomous systems making decisions about human lives can be catastrophic. For example, the use of AI in criminal justice raises concerns about bias in algorithms, as many systems have been shown to disproportionately target minority groups. As AI continues to evolve, philosophers are challenged not only to clarify the moral status of machines, but to ensure that their designs are aligned with human values and do not perpetuate harmful societal biases. Another pressing issue at the intersection of philosophy and technology is the ethical implications of biotechnology. With advances in gene editing technologies like CRISPR, humans are now capable of altering the genetic makeup of organisms in profound ways. This raises critical ethical questions about the limits of human intervention in the natural world. Should we use gene editing to eliminate genetic diseases, or should we also consider enhancing human traits, such as intelligence or physical strength? Philosophers like Francis Fukuyama have raised concerns about the ethical dangers of genetic modification, arguing that genetic engineering could lead to the creation of a new form of inequality where only those who can afford genetic enhancements have access to them. Others, such as Julian Savulescu, have argued that genetic modification should be seen as an opportunity to improve human life, reduce suffering, and increase overall well-being. In either case, the ethical implications of gene editing are far-reaching, affecting not only the individuals whose genes are altered, but also the broader social and environmental systems that we depend on. In addition to these ethical dilemmas, the philosophical implications of the environmental crisis are becoming more urgent. As climate change accelerates and ecosystems are threatened, philosophers are grappling with questions about how we should live in relation to the Earth. Should we prioritize economic growth and human development, or should we radically alter our way of life to preserve the planet for future generations? Environmental philosophers like Arne Naess, who championed deep ecology, argue that we need to fundamentally change our relationship with nature. According to deep ecology, the Earth and its ecosystems have intrinsic value, regardless of their utility to human beings. This view calls for a shift away from anthropocentrism, the belief that human beings are the most important entities on Earth, toward a more ecocentric view that sees all living organisms as interconnected and deserving of moral consideration. On the other hand, philosophers like John Rawls, who developed the theory of justice as fairness, have applied his framework to the issue of intergenerational justice. According to Rawls, justice should be understood as fairness, and this includes not only the distribution of goods and resources among current generations, but also between generations. Rawls' difference principle could be applied to the issue of climate change, suggesting that we have a moral obligation to ensure that the least advantaged future generations are not disproportionately harmed by our actions today. But while philosophical discussions about environmental ethics often center on the morality of human actions toward nature, they also intersect with the practical realities of global politics, as international bodies, like the United Nations, attempt to address climate change through global agreements, like the Paris Climate Accord. The question arises, how do we balance economic development and environmental protection in a way that is fair to all nations, particularly developing countries that may have historically contributed less to environmental degradation? This brings us to a major area of contemporary social and political philosophy, global justice. Philosophers like Thomas Page, Martha Nussbaum, and Amartya Sen have expanded the scope of justice beyond national borders, arguing that global inequality and the suffering of people in poorer nations should be a central concern of moral philosophy. Page's work on global justice focuses on the idea that wealthy nations have a moral obligation to address the systemic inequality perpetuated by global institutions, particularly in terms of trade, finance, and access to healthcare. He has criticized global economic structures for exacerbating poverty and inequality, suggesting that affluent nations should not only reduce the harm they cause through exploitation, but also actively work to remedy past injustices. Nussbaum, on the other hand, emphasizes the capabilities approach, which suggests that justice requires ensuring that all people have the opportunity to achieve a range of essential human capabilities, such as access to education, health, and basic freedoms. These debates about global justice are not abstract or distant. They are deeply connected to issues of migration, refugees, and human rights in a world that is becoming increasingly interconnected. Philosophers are called upon to address the ethical dilemmas posed by global conflicts, economic disparities, and environmental disasters. As political borders become more porous, the question of how to define justice in a globalized world is one of the most important philosophical concerns of the modern era. As we continue into the 21st century, it is clear that philosophy remains a vital tool for addressing the fundamental questions of our time. From the ethical implications of AI and biotechnology to the challenges of environmental justice and global inequality, philosophy helps us navigate the complexities of the modern world. In the face of rapid technological change and deepening social divides, philosophy encourages us to think critically about our values, our responsibilities, and our place in the world. As the 21st century progresses, we are faced with a host of new ethical dilemmas and philosophical challenges, many of which extend beyond traditional borders, be it national, cultural, or even temporal. The questions of how we live with each other, with our environment, and with the technologies we create have never been more urgent. In light of these global challenges, philosophy plays a vital role in helping us understand not only who we are, but how we can coexist more harmoniously with the world around us. One of the central concerns of contemporary philosophy is the future of democracy in a rapidly changing world. Political philosopher Jürgen Habermas, known for his work on the theory of communicative action, emphasized the importance of public discourse and the need for rational communication in democratic decision-making. Habermas argued that democratic societies thrive when citizens engage in open, reasoned dialogue, considering not only their personal interests, but also the collective good. This view of democracy as a process of shared deliberation has become even more crucial as the world faces increasing polarization and political fragmentation. In recent decades, the rise of social media, populist movements, and the erosion of traditional institutions have challenged the democratic ideals that Habermas and others have championed. In many places, democracy seems to be in crisis. Political discourse has become more divisive, and the ability to engage in meaningful, respectful debate has been undermined by misinformation, echo chambers, and the increasing influence of corporate interests. Philosophers like Nancy Fraser and Chantal Mouffe have critiqued the shortcomings of liberal democracy, arguing that it often fails to address deep structural inequalities and exclusionary practices. Fraser's concept of justice as recognition expands the idea of democracy by focusing on the need for social recognition and the removal of marginalization. She argues that for true justice to be achieved, we must not only address economic inequality, but also recognize the cultural and social dimensions of injustice. This involves addressing the ways in which certain groups, such as women, racial minorities, and LGBTQ+ individuals, are excluded from the full benefits of democratic society, not just economically, but in terms of recognition, respect, and participation in public life. Mouffe, on the other hand, has argued for a more radical approach to democracy, one that acknowledges the inherently antagonistic nature of politics. In her work, The Democratic Paradox, Mouffe contends that politics is not about achieving consensus or the best solution through rational deliberation, as Habermas suggested, but about recognizing the legitimate existence of opposing views and engaging in constructive conflict. This approach challenges the idea that democratic societies can achieve a final, harmonious consensus. Instead, Mouffe advocates for a more robust and inclusive form of democracy, one that embraces difference and conflict as a natural part of political life. Both of these perspectives are essential to understanding the contemporary political landscape. In an age of rising authoritarianism, populism, and social fragmentation, the ability to engage in meaningful, democratic dialogue is critical to preserving democratic ideals. The question of how to balance individual rights, collective well-being, and social recognition will continue to shape the political philosophy of the future. Another key issue in contemporary philosophy is the ethics of artificial intelligence and its impact on society. As AI systems become more integrated into our daily lives, philosophers are increasingly concerned with the ethical implications of their use, particularly in fields such as healthcare, law enforcement, and finance. One of the central questions is how we can ensure that AI technologies are aligned with human values and whether AI systems can be designed to act ethically. Philosophers like Elizabeth Anderson have explored the moral responsibilities that humans have in creating, using, and regulating AI. Anderson's work emphasizes the importance of ensuring that AI systems are used in ways that promote social good and mitigate harm, rather than simply maximizing profit or efficiency. Similarly, Timnit Gebru and Kate Crawford, who have written extensively on the ethical challenges of AI, argue that AI systems must be designed with attention to fairness, transparency, and accountability. The goal, they suggest, is not just to make AI more efficient or intelligent, but to ensure that AI works for the benefit of all people, particularly marginalized communities who have historically been excluded from technological progress. In addition to addressing the ethical use of AI, philosophers have also raised concerns about the potential consequences of automation. As AI systems continue to replace human labor in fields such as manufacturing, transportation, and even healthcare, questions arise about the future of work and income inequality. How can societies adapt to the increasing automation of jobs? Should we consider policies like universal basic income to provide financial support for those displaced by automation? And what does it mean for the concept of meaningful work when machines can perform tasks more efficiently than humans? The rise of AI and automation also raises questions about the nature of consciousness and personhood. If a machine can think, learn, and make decisions, should it be considered a person in a moral or legal sense? Some philosophers, such as David Chalmers, have argued that we must rethink our understanding of consciousness to account for the possibility that non-human entities, such as robots or AI systems, might possess a form of consciousness or subjective experience. This opens up profound questions about what it means to be human and whether machines could one day have rights, responsibilities, and moral consideration. Alongside these concerns about technology and democracy, contemporary philosophy is also deeply engaged with issues of social justice, particularly in regard to race, gender, and sexuality. The last few decades have seen a significant rise in movements advocating for the rights and recognition of marginalized groups. From the civil rights movement in the US to global feminist and LGBTQ movements, the fight for social justice has become a central concern for philosophers, who are increasingly examining how systems of oppression are maintained and how they can be dismantled. Philosophers like Kimberlé Crenshaw, who coined the term intersectionality, have argued that social justice movements must recognize the ways in which multiple forms of oppression, such as racism, sexism, homophobia, and classism, interact and reinforce one another. Crenshaw's work on intersectionality has been pivotal in reshaping our understanding of identity and inequality, emphasizing the importance of addressing the intersecting systems of power that shape people's lived experiences. Judith Butler, as we mentioned before, has further expanded on the concept of gender, challenging the binary understanding of gender and arguing that gender is performative rather than fixed. Her work has had a profound impact on feminist theory and queer theory, inspiring new ways of thinking about gender and sexuality. Butler's critique of gender norms challenges traditional assumptions about identity and power, emphasizing the fluidity and multiplicity of human experience. As we move deeper into the 21st century, the ongoing struggles for social justice, technological ethics, and political transformation will continue to shape the philosophical landscape. Philosophers are increasingly asked to engage not only with abstract ideas, but with real-world problems that demand urgent attention. Whether addressing the implications of AI, the ethics of genetic modification, or the fight for global justice, philosophy remains a vital tool for understanding and responding to the complex and interconnected world we inhabit. As we approach the final stretch of our philosophical journey, it's clear that the questions posed by philosophy are not merely academic exercises. They are, and always have been, tools for navigating the complexities of human existence. Today, we live in a world where philosophy intersects with nearly every aspect of our lives: technology, politics, social justice, ethics, and even our sense of identity. The challenges we face, from the ethical implications of artificial intelligence to the global struggle for climate justice, require us to reflect deeply on our values, our responsibilities, and the kind of future we wish to create. One of the most significant philosophical challenges of the 21st century is how to navigate the intersection of technology and humanity. As we've seen, artificial intelligence, automation, and biotechnology raise questions not just about how we live, but about what it means to be human. The rapid development of AI systems capable of making decisions, learning from data, and even performing tasks traditionally done by humans forces us to reconsider our understanding of intelligence, consciousness, and moral agency. Philosophers have long debated the nature of consciousness, but as AI grows more advanced, we are faced with the question of whether machines could ever be truly conscious in the way humans are. Can a machine that processes data and mimics human behavior ever experience the world subjectively, or will it always remain a complex system of algorithms devoid of awareness? Thinkers like David Chalmers, who has written extensively on the philosophy of mind, argue that we must confront the hard problem of consciousness, how subjective experience arises from physical processes in the brain. The advent of AI, however, forces us to ask whether consciousness is even a necessary feature for machines to be considered moral agents. Can machines that simulate human intelligence also be held morally accountable for their actions? These questions, which once seemed far from practical, are now deeply relevant as we move into a future where machines are increasingly integrated into every aspect of society. The ethical implications of AI go beyond the question of consciousness. As AI systems become more powerful and autonomous, they are increasingly tasked with making decisions that directly impact human lives. Decisions in healthcare, criminal justice, and even warfare. For example, AI algorithms are being used in predictive policing, where they determine which neighborhoods are at higher risk for crime and suggest resource allocation accordingly. These systems, however, are not free from bias, and many studies have shown that AI tends to disproportionately target minority groups. This raises a critical ethical question. How do we ensure that AI systems, which are designed to be impartial, do not perpetuate or even exacerbate societal inequalities? Philosophers like Ruha Benjamin, who has written on the intersection of race and technology, argue that we must approach AI development with a deep awareness of the social and political contexts in which these technologies are created and deployed. AI systems are not neutral. They are designed and built by humans who carry with them implicit biases. Benjamin's work emphasizes the need for an ethics of care in AI design, one that takes into account the experiences of marginalized communities and seeks to ensure that technology is used to promote social justice rather than deepen inequality. Alongside the philosophical debates on AI, there is another ethical frontier emerging in the realm of biotechnology. The ability to edit genes, both in humans and in the organisms around us, offers unprecedented opportunities for improving health and eradicating disease. However, this power also raises profound ethical dilemmas. As gene editing technologies, like CRISPR, become more advanced, we are confronted with the possibility of designing designer babies, where genetic traits such as intelligence, appearance, and physical health can be selected before birth. Philosophers like Nicholas Agar have explored the ethics of genetic enhancement, asking whether it is morally permissible to alter the genetic makeup of individuals to enhance their capabilities. Some argue that genetic enhancement could lead to a better future, where people are healthier, more intelligent, and more capable. Others, however, worry that genetic modification could lead to new forms of inequality, where only the wealthy can afford to enhance their children, creating a new genetic underclass. Moreover, some philosophers question whether it is ethical to design a child before birth, whether this violates the child's autonomy by imposing certain traits upon them before they can consent. These debates touch on fundamental ethical principles of autonomy, justice, and human dignity, and they will continue to shape the future of biotechnology for decades to come. As we address these complex ethical issues, it's important to consider the broader implications of our actions for the environment. The environmental crisis is one of the most pressing challenges of the 21st century, and philosophers are at the forefront of the debate on how we should respond. As we face the reality of climate change, biodiversity loss, and ecological destruction, the question of how we balance human development with environmental protection is more urgent than ever. The philosophy of environmental ethics urges us to rethink our relationship with the natural world, challenging the anthropocentric view that humans are the central agents of meaning and value on Earth. Thinkers like Arne, who founded the deep ecology movement, argue that we must shift our focus from human-centered environmental concerns to an ecocentric perspective, one that recognizes the inherent value of all living organisms and ecosystems, regardless of their utility to humans. Nies's ideas encourage us to see the Earth not as a resource to be exploited, but as a living entity that deserves respect and care. However, the challenge of balancing environmental protection with economic development is not easily solved. As the global population continues to grow, the demand for resources increases, and nations struggle to meet the basic needs of their citizens while also addressing the environmental crisis. Philosophers like Martha Nussbaum, with her capabilities approach, argue that the goal of development should be to expand human capabilities, not just to increase material wealth. This requires a broader understanding of what constitutes a good life, one that incorporates social, emotional, and environmental well-being. Nussbaum's work on human flourishing emphasizes the importance of creating a world where people can live dignified lives, free from poverty, oppression, and environmental degradation. In addressing the environmental crisis, the philosophical question of justice looms large. Who is responsible for addressing the damage caused by climate change? Are wealthy nations that have historically contributed most to environmental degradation obligated to bear the brunt of the cost for climate change mitigation? Or do we look to a global solution where all nations work together to create a more sustainable and equitable future? The increasing urgency of climate change is forcing philosophers to confront the idea of intergenerational justice, how we should live in a way that ensures future generations can also enjoy the planet's resources and a stable climate. What duties do we have to those who are yet to be born? These questions require not only ethical reflection, but practical action that takes into account both the science and the social values we wish to uphold in our shared future. As we stand at the crossroads of the 21st century, philosophy is more relevant than ever in helping us navigate the complex, rapidly changing world we live in. The challenges we face, from AI and biotechnology to climate change and social justice, demand thoughtful, engaged reflection on our ethical responsibilities and the kind of world we want to create. Philosophy is not merely an academic pursuit. It is an essential tool for shaping our future, helping us to ask the hard questions and guiding us toward a more just, equitable, and sustainable world. And with that, we reach the end of our philosophical journey. As we've seen, the questions that philosophers grapple with are not just theoretical. They are questions that shape our everyday lives, from the choices we make in the face of technology to how we understand our place in the world and our responsibility toward each other and the planet. The path of philosophy is winding and never ending, much like the quest for meaning itself. The thinkers we've encountered, from ancient Greece to the present, offer us insights that continue to challenge, provoke, and inspire us. Whether it's the pursuit of justice, the search for truth, or the contemplation of our very existence, philosophy has always been a tool for reflection and change. As we wind down tonight, think about these questions. What have you learned? What has shifted in your thinking? And how will you carry these reflections with you into tomorrow? Take a deep breath. Let the weight of these ideas settle, and allow the soothing hum of the world around you to carry you toward rest. Philosophy doesn't have all the answers, but it offers us the questions that help us become more conscious of the lives we lead. Now, let your thoughts drift like a calm river, and let the stillness of the night wash over you, bringing peace and clarity for the days ahead. Sweet dreams, my friend.